Well, deliberations underway in the trial of Brian Walsh, accused of murdering and dismembering his wife Anna back in 2023. Three's body has never been found. Prosecutors say he killed Anna to cash in on her life insurance policy and because she was having an affair. His defense claims he found Anna dead in the home, and he admits to disposing of her body. He did not take the stand. This week, prosecutors tied Anna's DNA to a hacksaw they say Brian used to dismember her.
Anna Walsh was born in Serbia before moving to the United States to build a career in real estate. Through hard work and professional ability, she gradually rose to become a senior executive at Tishman Speyer, one of America's largest real estate management companies, overseeing high-end residential projects in the Washington, D.C. area. Her colleagues described her as a professional, dedicated woman who was always punctual and highly responsible in her work qualities that later made her unusual absence the first warning sign to those around her. Her husband, Brian Walsh, came from a well-known family in the Boston area. He had attended prestigious schools and spent time working in finance and the art business. On the surface, the couple projected the image of an ideal family living in Cohasset, an affluent coastal town in Massachusetts, where average property prices rank among the highest in the country, and where most residents are successful, well-established families. Former prosecutor Josh Ritter, who followed the case from its earliest days, described them as an ideal couple living in a very wealthy neighborhood, an image shared by many of their neighbors and friends before the truth came to light. However, behind that seemingly perfect facade, the Walsh family was facing serious pressures. By the end of 2022, Brian was awaiting sentencing in a federal art fraud case, a matter that could result in a substantial prison sentence, directly threatening the family's financial stability and future. The couple had 3 young sons who, according to those close to the family, were the center of Anna's daily life. She constantly worked to balance her demanding career with the responsibilities of motherhood, a role she always placed above everything else. In addition to the legal pressure weighing heavily on Brian, their marriage was also going through a period of significant strain. According to information revealed during the investigation, Anna had reportedly been considering moving to the Washington, D.C. area with the children, partly because she was concerned that Brian might soon be sent to prison. Bob Ward, a Boston journalist who closely followed the case from the very beginning, later said that the problems simmering beneath what appeared to be a perfect marriage would ultimately erupt in a way that none of the couple's friends or relatives could ever have imagined. For those who knew the Walsh family only through their public image, happy family photographs and gatherings in their prestigious neighborhood, the reality behind closed doors was completely different from what they had always believed. It was against this backdrop of financial pressure, legal uncertainty, and quietly deepening cracks in their marriage that the Walsh family entered the final days of 2022, a period that, not long afterwards, would mark the most tragic turning point in the lives of all 5 members of their small family. Several weeks before everything happened, Brian Walsh's mother, Diana Walsh, contacted a private investigator named Jeremy Dozier. In a recorded phone call that was later made public, her voice cracked as she said, "I want to hire a private investigator to find out some information about my daughter-in-law." According to Dozier, Diana called because she suspected that Anna was involved in a romantic relationship with a new acquaintance in the Washington, D.C. area named William Fastow. Notably, on that very same day, Brian Walsh conducted internet searches relating to divorce proceedings, a coincidence that later became one of the details investigators paid particular attention to. Evidence gathered during the investigation appeared to reinforce the Walsh family's suspicions. Anna's private conversations indicated that she was ready to move forward with her life, completely separate from a marriage that was on the verge of collapse. William Fastow, who was later confirmed to be her boyfriend, described in his statement that Anna and Brian's marriage had completely fallen apart, and there was no way to save it. On the evening of 31 December 2022, the Walsh family hosted a New Year's Eve dinner at their home in Cohasset, attended by a close friend named Jem Mutlu. Mutlu later stated that she had noticed nothing unusual between the couple. Throughout the evening, everything appeared to be an ordinary family gathering to celebrate the end of the year. In the early hours of 1 January 2023, Anna Walsh was last seen at her own home. This was the final moment that anyone outside the family could confirm seeing her alive, before she disappeared completely from all contact in the days that followed. Over the following days, not a single text message or phone call from Anna was recorded. For a woman who always kept in close contact with colleagues and friends, the prolonged silence, although not publicly acknowledged at the time, had already begun to concern those closest to her. It was also on that first day of the new year that Brian Walsh reportedly took another notable step. He left a voicemail message for none other than William Fastow, the man his mother had suspected was romantically involved with his wife. When this detail came to light months later, it became one of the key pieces of evidence that helped investigators reconstruct Brian's state of mind during those critical hours. For Anna, the final hours she spent at the family home in Cohasset seemed no different from any other New Year's morning, with no warning signs and no farewell ever recorded. Within just a few short hours, the woman known for her unwavering dedication and impeccable punctuality had completely disappeared from the lives of those who loved her most, leaving behind 3 young sons and countless unanswered questions. No cameras captured what actually happened inside the home in Cohasset during the early hours of the new year. No witnesses ever saw the moment Anna Walsh was no longer alive. This is one of the rare homicide cases in which investigators had to reconstruct the entire sequence of events solely through circumstantial evidence, digital data, security camera footage, and forensic analysis. Throughout the legal proceedings that followed, Brian Walsh offered his own explanation. He claimed that he found his wife dead in their bed early that morning, with no idea how she had died, and that he fell into a state of extreme panic upon making the discovery. Prosecutors, however, presented a completely different account, built upon the chain of evidence gathered during months of investigation. They argued that Brian had a clear financial motive. He was the sole beneficiary of his wife's life insurance policy, valued at US $2.7 million. They also pointed to jealousy as a possible motive, alleging that he had discovered his wife was involved in a new romantic relationship, while he himself was facing an impending federal prison sentence. On the very first night of the new year, security cameras near the family home captured footage of a man resembling Brian Walsh making repeated trips to public rubbish bins during unusually late hours. These were the first images in a series of activities spanning several days that would eventually become the central focus of the investigation. At the same time, digital forensic specialists recovered Brian's internet search history from his electronic devices. The searches included queries relating to body decomposition, methods of disposing of a body, and ways to eliminate biological evidence, details that later became some of the most damaging evidence presented against him in court. Although forensic examinations were ultimately unable to determine exactly how Anna died, they uncovered biological evidence strong enough to directly link Brian to the family home and to items later recovered from waste disposal sites. When presented together before the jury, this chain of evidence became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. That brief but uncertain period between New Year's Eve and the morning of New Year's Day became the central point of dispute throughout the legal proceedings, where 2 completely opposing narratives, one from the defendant himself and the other from prosecutors, supported by scientific evidence, were placed side by side for the jury to determine what had truly happened. On the first working day after the holiday period, one of Anna's colleagues in the security division where she worked noticed that she had not shown up, nor had she given any prior explanation for her absence. For someone known for strictly adhering to her work schedule, failing to attend without notice was immediately regarded as highly unusual. The colleague reported the matter to management, and the information was quickly passed on to police in the Washington, D.C. area, where Anna regularly worked. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, officers there contacted the Cohasset Police Department in Massachusetts, where the Walsh family lived. William Quigley, chief of the Cohasset Police Department, later explained at a press conference that it was this call from Anna's colleague that set the entire investigation in motion. Her colleague from the security department reported that she hadn't turned up for work, and that wasn't consistent with what he knew about Anna and her work ethic. When police contacted Brian Walsh to check on the situation, he told them that his wife had flown to Washington, D.C. to deal with a work emergency. When questioned further, he said that he had been unable to contact her since then. However, this very detail became the first major point that drew investigators' attention to Brian. Chief Quigley later stated, "We found it very unusual that the husband didn't contact us straight away when he hadn't heard from his wife for several days, especially given that they had 3 young children." Brian's unusual silence, combined with his failure to report Anna missing despite several days having passed, led investigators to begin considering the possibility that his account did not fully match what had actually happened. After receiving the report, the Cohasset Police Department officially opened a missing person investigation into Anna Walsh's disappearance. Officers immediately began gathering information from her family members, colleagues, and friends to establish exactly when she had last been seen and to compare those accounts with Brian's initial statements to investigators. News of the disappearance of a mother of 3 from an affluent and peaceful town like Cohasset quickly spread throughout the local community. For many residents, it was the kind of incident they had never imagined could happen in their own neighborhood. An initial sense of shock that would only deepen as increasingly troubling details emerged over the following days. Meanwhile, at Anna's workplace in Washington, D.C., concern spread rapidly among her colleagues. Many later told investigators that they had never known Anna to miss work without giving advance notice, not even once during the time they had worked with her, further reinforcing the belief that something serious had happened. During the early days of the investigation, officers from the Cohasset Police Department went directly to the Walsh family home to gather further information and make initial observations of the property. From their very first interactions, Brian's limited level of cooperation made the information-gathering process far more difficult than in a typical missing person case. Recognizing the complexity of the situation, the Cohasset Police Department quickly partnered with the Massachusetts State Police to expand the investigation. This is standard procedure in missing person cases involving suspicious circumstances, particularly when the statements of the closest family member do not fully align with the evidence collected. Police obtained a formal search warrant for the Walsh family home in Cohasset. Crime scene investigators were deployed to thoroughly examine the property, searching for any signs that might reveal what had actually taken place inside the house during the first days of the new year. At the same time, investigators turned their attention to security camera footage from around the Cohasset area, focusing particularly on recordings showing unusual activity near public rubbish bins during the first few days of January. This became the lead that shaped the next phase of the investigation, extending the search well beyond the family home. The Massachusetts State Police, working alongside specialist investigators, also searched a waste transfer facility near the home of Brian Walsh's mother. The operation took several days, with investigators painstakingly sorting through large volumes of collected rubbish in an effort to locate any evidence that might be directly connected to Anna's disappearance. During this period, Brian Walsh began communicating through his legal representatives, significantly limiting investigators' ability to question him directly. Many legal commentators later suggested that this development further strengthened investigators' suspicions. Only a few days after the missing person investigation had begun, authorities' assessment of the case changed dramatically. What had initially been treated as a routine missing person inquiry gradually evolved into a full-scale criminal investigation involving multiple specialist agencies, reflecting the growing suspicion surrounding what had actually happened to Anna Walsh. Residents of Cohasset, accustomed to a quiet and peaceful community, suddenly found themselves watching police vehicles and investigative teams gathering outside the home of a family once regarded as one of the neighborhood's model households. The stark contrast left many neighbors deeply shocked. Local media also quickly took notice of the unusually large law enforcement presence in the area, marking the point at which Anna Walsh's disappearance began to move beyond a local news story and attract attention across the entire state. Unlike most homicide cases, where the post-mortem examination plays a central role in determining the cause of death, the Anna Walsh case lacked that crucial element. There was no body to examine. This presented one of the rarest forensic challenges prosecutors had ever faced, forcing them to build their entire murder case solely on circumstantial evidence. At the waste transfer facility searched by investigators, forensic teams recovered a series of disturbing items: a hatchet, a hammer, a pair of cutting shears, a hacksaw, several towels, a Tyvek chemical protective suit, and a range of heavy-duty industrial cleaning products. They also found a Prada handbag, a pair of boots believed to match those Anna had been wearing the last time she was seen, and, most notably, a COVID-19 vaccination card bearing her name. All of these items were sent to the Massachusetts State Crime Laboratory for detailed forensic examination. The analysis later confirmed that DNA belonging to both Anna and Brian Walsh was present on the Tyvek protective suit, a significant finding, given that this type of clothing is typically worn to prevent direct exposure to hazardous biological materials. Even more significant, forensic experts also confirmed the presence of Anna's DNA on both the hatchet and the hacksaw recovered during the search. Viewed in the context of the broader investigation, these two items formed a powerful chain of biological evidence that would be difficult to explain away in court. At the same time, forensic specialists carried out an extensive examination of the Walsh family home, searching for any biological traces that might have remained despite cleaning efforts. Investigators used specialized forensic techniques capable of detecting blood evidence that had been washed away and could no longer be seen with the naked eye. Taken together, this body of forensic evidence, although it could never replace the absence of a body, provided a scientific foundation strong enough for prosecutors to confidently pursue a charge of first-degree murder, an uncommon but not unprecedented legal strategy in the history of Massachusetts criminal prosecutions. Independent forensic experts who later commented on the case said that the combination of DNA found on the suspected weapons, biological evidence recovered from the protective suit, and the victim's distinctive personal belongings discovered at the same location created a chain of evidence for which there appeared to be no reasonable explanation other than that the items had been used during the disposal of the victim's remains after her death. For the prosecutors leading the case, this represented the strongest scientific foundation available to them, a collection of physical evidence that relied not on witness testimony or motive, but on what forensic science could objectively demonstrate before any jury. At the same time, Investigators expanded their digital evidence collection, focusing on Brian Walsh's complete online activity in the days before and after his wife's disappearance. Digital forensic specialists recovered a series of notable internet searches, revealing an unusual period of online activity that closely matched the time frame during which investigators believe Anna died. Investigators also interviewed William Fastow, who was believed to be Anna's boyfriend, to clarify the nature of their relationship and verify the information Brian's mother had previously shared with private investigator Jeremy Dozier. Fastow's statement, together with the voicemail Brian left for him on New Year's Day, became an important part of reconstructing Brian's state of mind, leading up to the alleged crime. The recorded phone call between Diana Walsh and private investigator Jeremy Dozier was also included in the official case file, providing further circumstantial evidence of the serious breakdown in Brian and Anna's marriage shortly before her disappearance. Another major line of inquiry focused on financial motives. Investigators examined the details of Anna's $2.7 million life insurance policy, confirming that Brian was its sole beneficiary, a clear financial motive that was later incorporated into the prosecution's case. At the same time, prosecutors reviewed the complete file relating to Brian's federal art fraud case, for which he was awaiting sentencing when Anna disappeared. Their aim was to assess the extent of the financial and psychological pressure he may have been under, which prosecutors later argued formed part of his motive. Throughout the investigation, detectives also carefully examined and ruled out every alternative explanation for Anna's disappearance, including the possibility that she had voluntarily left her life behind to start over elsewhere, as Brian initially claimed. However, the complete absence of any financial activity, personal communications, or travel records after 1 January quickly eliminated that theory as a realistic possibility. Investigators also interviewed additional members of both families and close friends of the couple in an effort to build a more complete picture of the tensions that had been building within the marriage for months before Anna disappeared. Although these witness statements were not as decisive as the physical evidence, they nevertheless played an important role in reinforcing the motive that prosecutors would later present to the jury, helping explain why a husband might have resorted to such an extreme act against his own wife. By this stage, almost every major piece of the investigation had fallen into place, from the digital evidence and financial motive to the deep fractures within the marriage. Only one step remained: the formal legal process of bringing Brian Walsh before the courts. On 8 January 2023, just 1 week after Anna Walsh was last seen, police formally arrested Brian Walsh. However, at this initial stage, he was not charged with murder. Instead, he was charged with misleading investigators, based on the clear inconsistencies between his original statements and the evidence police had gathered during the first week of the investigation. The arrest took place while authorities were still awaiting the results of forensic testing on evidence recovered from the waste transfer facility. It was a strategic decision by prosecutors, intended to ensure that Brian could not move freely or potentially destroy additional evidence while forensic examinations continued. At his initial detention hearing, the judge denied Brian bail, citing concerns that he posed a significant flight risk and the seriousness of the evidence already presented to the court. He was remanded into custody at the Norfolk County Correctional Facility pending further legal proceedings. Around 10 days later, after the Massachusetts State Crime Laboratory completed its DNA analysis and confirmed the presence of Anna's biological material on several recovered items, the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office formally upgraded the charge against Brian Walsh to the most serious offense available under Massachusetts law: first-degree murder. This marked the most significant legal turning point in the entire case. For the first time, prosecutors publicly declared that they believed Anna Walsh was dead and that her husband was directly responsible, even though her body had still not been found at the time the murder charge was filed. According to those present in court, Brian Walsh remained remarkably calm when he was informed of the upgraded charge. Many legal observers later described his reaction as unusual, particularly when compared with the response typically seen from defendants facing a first-degree murder charge for the first time in Massachusetts. With the charge elevated to first-degree murder, any realistic possibility of Brian being granted bail was effectively eliminated. He remained in custody throughout the lengthy pre-trial process, while his and Anna's 3 young sons were placed in the care of relatives, a heartbreaking reality that added another tragic dimension to a case already drawing intense public attention. News of the upgraded charge spread rapidly across national media, transforming the case from a mysterious missing person investigation into one of the most closely followed murder cases in the United States in 2023, not only because of the disturbing evidence that had emerged, but also because of the stark contrast between the image of a seemingly perfect, affluent family and the reality that investigators alleged had been hidden behind the doors of their Cohasset home. Throughout the nearly 3 years of legal proceedings following his arrest, Brian Walsh rarely spoke directly with investigators without his lawyer present. This is a fundamental legal right guaranteed to every defendant in the United States, and his defense team exercised that right from the earliest days after his arrest. However, shortly before his murder trial was due to begin in December 2025, Brian Walsh made an unexpected legal decision. He agreed to plead guilty to two separate charges: unlawful disposal of a human body and misleading police. At the plea hearing, before the judge and prosecutors, Brian formally admitted that he had dismembered his wife's body and disposed of the remains at multiple locations, including the waste transfer facility that investigators had previously searched. It was the first time in nearly 3 years of silence that the public heard Brian himself acknowledge part of what had happened. Even so, in that same plea, Brian continued to deny responsibility for Anna's death. He claimed that he had discovered her already dead on the morning of New Year's Day, without knowing how she had died, and insisted that his decision to dismember and dispose of her body was a panicked reaction to an unexpected situation, rather than an attempt to conceal a killing he had committed. This partial admission, accepting responsibility for some actions while completely denying responsibility for Anna's death, became one of the central points of dispute throughout the murder trial that followed. Jurors were left to assess the credibility of Brian's account against the extensive body of scientific and forensic evidence presented by prosecutors. Many legal experts who later analyzed the case suggested that this strategy of pleading guilty to only part of the alleged conduct may have been a calculated move by the defense. It potentially allowed Brian to avoid additional charges related to concealing evidence while offering an alternative narrative designed to create reasonable doubt about the true cause of Anna's death. For Anna's family, listening to Brian describe in detail how he disposed of the body of their beloved daughter, sister, wife, and mother while continuing to deny causing her death was an unimaginably painful experience. Anna's sister, who attended the proceedings throughout, later said it was one of the most difficult moments the family had endured since Anna disappeared. Following this partial guilty plea, Brian Walsh made no further public statements. He remained completely silent while awaiting the start of his murder trial, leaving both the prosecution and the defense to present their competing versions of the truth before the jury. Brian Walsh's first-degree murder trial officially commenced on 1 December 2025 at the Norfolk County Superior Court in Dedham, Massachusetts. It marked the moment when prosecutors formally presented the full body of evidence they had assembled over nearly 3 years of investigation before a jury. Over the course of the 2-week trial, the prosecution called approximately 48 to 50 witnesses, making it one of the longest witness lists ever presented in a criminal trial in Massachusetts. Those witnesses included Anna's colleagues, close friends of both Anna and Brian, forensic experts, digital forensic analysts, and numerous police officers who had been directly involved in the investigation from its earliest stages. William Fastow also took the stand, providing detailed testimony about his relationship with Anna and confirming the breakdown of her marriage to Brian in the period leading up to her disappearance. Prosecutors relied on his testimony as an important part of establishing jealousy as a motive. Meanwhile, the defense made a notable strategic decision. Brian Walsh's legal team chose not to call a single witness on his behalf throughout the entire trial. Brian himself also exercised his legal right not to testify before the jury, meaning that the panic explanation he had offered during his earlier guilty plea hearing was neither repeated nor defended directly in court. According to many legal commentators, the defense strategy focused primarily on challenging the logic and certainty of the prosecution's circumstantial evidence rather than presenting an entirely different account of what had happened. During closing arguments, prosecutors brought together the entire chain of evidence presented over the previous 2 weeks, from the alleged financial motive and the breakdown of the marriage to the suspicious internet searches and the compelling DNA evidence recovered from the seized items. They argued that these were not isolated or coincidental events, but the result of a deliberate act followed by a calculated attempt to conceal the crime. In contrast, the defense maintained during its closing argument that although the evidence showed Brian had participated in disposing of Anna's body, a fact he had already admitted, this did not prove that he was the person who had caused her death. Defense counsel argued that a meaningful gap still existed between concealing a body and committing murder, and that the jury needed to carefully consider whether that gap created reasonable doubt before reaching its final verdict. After both sides completed their presentations, the jury, made up of 6 men and 6 women, retired to deliberate. After approximately 6 hours of discussion, on 15 December 2025, the jury returned with its verdict. Brian Walsh was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict drew widespread attention across the United States because it became one of the rare murder cases in which a defendant was convicted even though the victim's body had never been recovered. Many legal experts described it as a significant victory for the prosecution, demonstrating that a compelling murder case could be built entirely on circumstantial and forensic evidence. 3 days later, on 18 December 2025, the judge formally sentenced Brian Walsh. He received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the most severe penalty available under Massachusetts law for a first-degree murder conviction. In delivering the sentence, the judge described Brian Walsh's actions as barbaric and incomprehensible, emphasizing the brutality of the way he treated his wife's remains after taking her life. Separate sentences for unlawfully disposing of a body and misleading investigators were ordered to run consecutively, ensuring that Brian would never regain his freedom. Inside the courtroom, Anna's sister, Alexandra Dmitrievic, addressed the court, describing the loss as an unbearable emptiness for the entire family. She said the greatest tragedy was not only Anna's death, but also the fact that her 3 young sons would now grow up without their mother's love and guidance. Outside the courthouse, public reaction across the United States was largely supportive of the verdict, particularly given the extensive scientific evidence presented by prosecutors throughout the trial. At the same time, many expressed deep sadness that Anna's family might never have the opportunity to lay her to rest properly, as her body has never been found. American media outlets, including several investigative documentaries and in-depth special reports, continued to follow the case even after the sentence was handed down. Much of the coverage focused on the question that still remains unanswered. Will Anna Walsh's remains ever be found, and will Brian Walsh ever reveal where they are? For those who had followed the case from the very beginning, the verdict did not feel like a complete ending. Instead, it brought legal proceedings to a close while leaving behind a far more personal question, one that no life sentence, no matter how severe, can ever truly answer for the family still searching for peace. 3 young boys are now growing up with a family story that no child should ever have to carry for the rest of their lives, a mother who never came home, and a father who will spend the remainder of his life behind prison walls. Anna Walsh was a woman who built a successful career from the ground up in a foreign country. She devoted herself to balancing the demands of a high-level profession with the love and care she gave her children. Yet the world ultimately came to know her not for what she achieved, but for the way her life ended and for how the truth remained hidden for months. No sentence, no matter how severe, can bring Anna back to her children. No verdict can fill the empty space left by a mother in the lives of 3 boys who were far too young to fully understand what had happened to their family. Anna Walsh's case also leaves behind a question that reaches far beyond the courtroom. Sometimes the most picture-perfect lives, a happy marriage, a beautiful home, a successful family admired by others, can conceal the deepest fractures, hidden from everyone until it is far too late. If you or someone close to you is experiencing signs that a relationship may be becoming unsafe or deeply troubled, don't wait until the situation spirals beyond control. Speak up, reach out for help. Taking action early can make all the difference. Thank you for staying with us through Anna Walsh's story to the very end. If this case has given you something to think about, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story we bring you. We'll see you in the next video. Like so many of the cases we've covered, this story is more than just another investigation that reached a legal conclusion. It serves as a reminder that behind every statistic and every headline are real people and real families, forced to learn how to live with a loss that never truly fades.